currently Earth.
It was March 3rd in the year 1865 that President Abraham Lincoln, our nation's 16th president, signed a bill creating the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. Known as the Freedmen's Bureau, this federal agency oversaw the difficult transition of African Americans from slavery to freedom. The Freedmen's Bureau, born out of abolitionist concern for formerly enslaved people, was headed by General Oliver O. Howard for the entire 7 years of its existence. The Bureau was given power to dispense relief to both white and black refugees in the South, provide medical care and education, and redistribute abandoned lands to formerly enslaved people. The latter task was probably the most effective measure to ensure the prosperity and security of the freedmen, but it was also extremely difficult to enact. Many factors stymied the Bureau's work. White Southerners were very hostile to the Yankee Bureau members, and even more hostile to the formerly enslaved people. Terror organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan targeted both black people and white people and intimidated those trying to help them. The Bureau lacked the necessary funds and personnel to carry out its programs, and the lenient policies of President Andrew Johnson's administration encouraged resistance. Most of the land confiscated from Confederates was eventually restored to the original owners, so there was little opportunity for black land ownership. Although the Freedmen's Bureau was not able to provide long-term protection for black people, nor did it ensure any real measure of equality, it did signal the introduction of the federal government into issues of social welfare and labor relations. It was March 3rd in the year 1887 that Anne Sullivan began teaching 6-year-old Helen Keller, who lost her sight and hearing after a severe illness at the age of 19 months. Under Sullivan's tutelage, including her pioneering touch teaching techniques, Keller flourished, eventually graduating from college and becoming an international lecturer and activist. Sullivan, later dubbed the Miracle Worker, remained Keller's interpreter and constant companion until the older woman's continuance of eternity in 1936. Anne Sullivan was born in Massachusetts in 1866 and had first-hand experience with being handicapped. As a child, an infection impaired her vision. She then attended the Perkins Institution for the Blind, where she learned the manual alphabet in order to communicate with a classmate who was deaf and blind. Eventually, Sullivan had several operations that improved her weakened eyesight. Helen Adams Keller was born on June 27, 1880, to Arthur Keller, a former Confederate Army officer and newspaper publisher, and his wife Kate of Tuscumbia, Alabama. As a baby, a brief illness, possibly scarlet fever or a form of bacterial meningitis, left Helen unable to see, hear, or speak. She was considered a bright but spoiled and strong-willed child. Her parents eventually sought the advice of Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone and an authority on the deaf. He suggested the Kellers contact the Perkins Institution, which in turn recommended Anne Sullivan as a teacher. Anne Sullivan, at age 20, arrived at Ivy Green, the Keller family estate, in 1887 and began working to socialize her wild, stubborn student and teach her by spelling out words in Keller's hand. Initially, the finger spelling meant nothing to Keller. However, a breakthrough occurred one day when Sullivan held one of Keller's hands under water from a pump and spelled out W-A-T-E-R in Keller's palm. Keller went on to learn how to read, write, and speak. With Sullivan's assistance, Keller attended Radcliffe College and graduated with honors in 1904. Helen Keller became a public speaker and author. Her first book, The Story of My Life, was published in 1902. She was also a fundraiser for the American Foundation for the Blind and an advocate for racial and sexual equality, as well as socialism. From 1920 to 1924, Sullivan and Keller even formed a vaudeville act to educate the public and earn money. Helen Keller continued her eternity on June 1st in 1968 at her home in Easton, Connecticut, at the age of 87, leaving her mark on the world by helping to alter perceptions about the disabled. It was March 3rd in the year 1918 in the city of Brest-Litovsk, located in modern-day Belarus, near the Polish border. Russia signed a treaty with the Central Powers ending its participation in World War I. Russia's involvement in World War I alongside its allies, France and Britain, had resulted in a number of heavy losses against Germany, offset only partially by consistent victories against Austria-Hungary. Defeat on the battlefield fed the growing discontent among the bulk of Russia's population, especially the poverty-stricken workers and peasants, and its hostility towards the imperial regime, led by the ineffectual Tsar Nicholas II. This discontent strengthened the cause of the Bolsheviks, a radical socialist group led by Vladimir Lenin that was working to harness opposition to the Tsar and turn it into a sweeping revolution that would begin in Russia and later, he hoped, spread to the rest of the world. The February Revolution broke out in early March 1917, or February according to the Julian calendar, which the Russians used at the time. Nicholas abdicated later that month. After Lenin's return from exile, aided by the Germans, in mid-April, he and his fellow Bolsheviks worked quickly to seize power from the provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky, Russia's Minister of War. On November 6, aided by the Russian military, they were successful. One of Lenin's first actions as leader was to call a halt to Russian participation in the war. An armistice was reached in early December of 1917, and a formal ceasefire was declared December 15th, but determining the terms of peace between Russia and the Central Powers would be far more complicated. Negotiations began at Brest-Litovsk on December 22nd. Leading their respective delegations were Foreign Ministers Leon Trotsky of Russia, Baron Richard von Kuhlmann of Germany, and Count Ottokar Czernin of Austria. I think that's Czernin, Czernin, so it would be Czernin, not Czernin, whatever I said. In mid-February, the talks broke down when an angry Trotsky deemed the Central Powers' terms too harsh and their demands for territory unacceptable. Fighting resumed briefly on the Eastern Front, but the German armies advanced quickly, and both Lenin and Trotsky soon realized that Russia, in its weakened state, would be forced to give in to the enemy's terms. Negotiations resumed later that month, and the final treaty was signed on March 3rd. By the terms of the treaty, Brest-Litovsk, Russia recognized the independence of Ukraine, Georgia, and Finland, gave up Poland and the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to Germany and Austria-Hungary, and ceded Kars, Ardahan, and Batum to Turkey. Batum. My apologies, I believe that's Batum, Turkey, not Batum. The total losses constituted 1 million square miles of Russia's former territory, a third of its population, or 55 million people, a majority of its coal, oil, and iron stores, and much of its industry. Lenin, who bitterly called the settlement that abyss of defeat, dismemberment, enslavement, and humiliation, was forced to hope that the spread of world revolution, his greatest dream, would eventually right the wrongs done at Brest-Litovsk.